All right, let's go inside of what happened on Friday night and what needs to happen this upcoming Saturday. We welcome in Ben Aude from the BA Coaches Show. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning. How are you guys doing today?
I think I'm better. If we were doing the show on Saturday, probably would have had a different tone.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think the positive about this game being on Friday is it kind of gave an extra day to process. So, yeah, I agree with you there.
There's a lot of different things that I want to discuss, but I want to go a place where probably people won't immediately go, but I think you get maybe what they're trying to do. What's your observation on Nebraska on the back end? Is it the transition from Cooper to Butler? Did they change their schemes a little bit? Because they don't seem to be on point through
Yeah.
4 games consistently like maybe we thought they would. Now, I know Buford, if you run him vertically, that's going to be a challenge. We know Hartzog, but they're just in the back end, there seems to be something off. Do you observe that? And if that's the case, what do you think is different that maybe also can be fixed?
I 100% observed that. I went through and watched the game Saturday morning again, and then I watched it again yesterday. And every time that I've watched it back, I've had a pretty consistent theme of our defensive backs did not play very good at all on Friday night. And I do think that it is probably a change in the scheme because we have changed the scheme quite a bit just from what we did last year to this year. I'm not sure if it's a transition from Butler to Cooper. I don't know, but I will be real with you guys. That is at least something that I'm keeping my eye on, if that makes sense. I had kind of made some notes down because, in my opinion, we didn't really see a lot of these completely wide open errors last year from Cooper's DBs. And maybe it's a scheme, maybe it's a bunch of things, but there was like that first touchdown in particular is what that first touchdown really rubbed me the wrong way when I went back and watched it a few times. And the reason being is without knowing like the defensive call, you're never going to know like 100% like who was at fault, right? But I was able to at least narrow it down to the it was either the corner or the safety on that play. I forgot who the two were off the top of my head, and I won't, go throw them out there. But it was either supposed to be they're supposed to bracket him off for a double team because otherwise there's no reason for our corner to start inside and then cross his face and go outside unless we're going to have a safety helping over the top, taking away the inside. The problem with that was when our corner went outside, if you go back and watch that play, the safety just stood there. Mm-hmm. So there was just a wide open receiver with a completely huge open window to the inside. So those are things that I definitely think obviously have to be fixed. Have to. But I do believe they are fixable. I think some of the fixes need to be more looking in the film room now. I mean, obviously what they do on the practice field and all that's mega important. But I think at least some of these mistakes, you can just pull up that game film and say, look at this. Like, how did this happen right here?
I know it's been a few days, but when I last interacted with you Friday night after the game, it was the overtime portion of Nebraska, and not even
worst overtime in the history of college football.
It was 100%. Awful. And I know then everyone starts going back to since 2014, the last time that Nebraska put points on, but hell, even get a first down. So it's 28 plays, minus 21 yards and 4 interceptions since then. When you look at what Nebraska's trying to do, and obviously penalties set you off. What happened with the offensive line the next couple plays too set you back. I don't want to go all the way back because of different teams, different personnel, but as far as what you're seeing Nebraska accomplish, let's just start with this. How big was that, the procedure penalty to set Nebraska off, and what they showed they could do throughout the game and what they still had the ability to do and unfortunately did not in overtime?
I think that procedure penalty was huge because we had no momentum at that point after the defense had already been out there, and that just took away even the slightest bit of momentum that we could possibly have. It already just set us off. And I agree with you guys. That was just that was one of the worst overtime periods
and there's been bad
I've
ones.
ever seen. Yeah, but that's up there. And like just because it was both sides of the ball that looked absolutely atrocious out there. I think the biggest thing is if I try to put myself in Matt Rule's shoes a little bit, like what would I do in this situation? Because there's obviously a ton of things from that game that did not go good. There's a lot of them. I know that it was a close game, but I think we can all agree there's a lot of facets of that game that did not look good. If I'm putting myself in Matt Rule's shoes, I'm calling in all my coordinators individually, and then I'm going to call in like my team captains as a whole of the units, right? And just kind of say, how did our mindset get here? How did this happen so badly? And I think, again, it was both sides of the ball. Like, we can't let a 5-yard procedural penalty lead up to, 3 sacks in 4 plays? Like, that just, we can't end up letting one bad thing happen on offense to end up becoming a 3rd and 42. Like, those kinds of things, that was very troubling to me. And then obviously defensively, you come out at overtime and it's just a huge, that was terrible. I mean, that first run, that was just not very sound football at all. Like, that was just supposed to be an inside zone that he popped out to the outside and almost scored a touchdown on that first play. That's just not being very gap disciplined.
Yeah, I was startled at how unprepared Nebraska was when they started overtime, which I'm vibing with something I'm feeling that after Dylan had the rare miss in the end zone to Lindenmeyer, that game was essentially over. And it was like, oh, here we go again. Another part of the defense, and this has to do with a lot of the red zone and success on Friday night. Why do you think Illinois had so much success with play calls near the goal line that it made Nebraska look like they weren't even on the field?
I don't know if it was something that they saw on film, and if it is, then props to them. We bit on that play action pass at the goal line every single time. Like, that was something that was also very upsetting to me, because something that Matt Rule had said kind of going into the game was, hey, a lot of this game preparation is going to be how we adjust at halftime, how we adjust during the game, right? And hey, they get a touchdown off the play action pass at the goal line. All good. They saw something on film. The fact that they did it, was that 3 times, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was very troubling to me, that every time at the goal line, we just bid on it it was wide open receivers, guys. That's what was bothering me. It's not like, oh man, this guy just made a heck of a play. Like, hey, sometimes you got to live with that. That's football. You know what I mean? But when we're crashing in on the run so hard and we're just not even accounting for a tight end, that was very troubling to me. That it, like you said, it was like Nebraska defense wasn't even on the field in some of those situations. And that's what was troubling to me. But again, I feel like those are things that could potentially be fixed. I'm not one of those guys that's going to come on here and say the sky is falling or anything. I do think these things are fixable, but it was a very big red flag to me that we weren't adjusting and getting kind of burnt by the same things all night.
Well, and you're right. And on top of that, there was a lot of, you mentioned receivers just, running open pretty much the entire night. My question, and this kind of goes back to what Gary talked about, the secondary too, is it scheme? Is it just simple lack of communication? The whole idea between, thinking it could be fixed, we still feel confident, right? And maybe we don't, Ben, but I'm asking you, we still feel confident that they have the Jimmies and Joes on that side of the football that can make those adjustments. I mean, is it more of a communication thing?
I do think there is quite a few communication errors that happened on Friday night. I mean, if you just go look at some of those big plays, you can kind of see some of our players. And I hate the whole, when you just kind of throw your arms up at each other thing. But to me, you can tell there was a few communication errors. And some of those wide open receivers, you can see that, in some of the zone coverage, there just was no pass off. So then the guy ends up wide open. So I do think it's fixable. And you ask, am I still confident? And my answer is yes. But I'm not as confident today as I was a week ago, if that makes sense. I came on here last week and said, hey, I think, when you guys asked who the unit was going to be, I put the defensive backs because I thought they were going to get tested a little bit by an offense and a game plan that was going to be good. Well, they failed that test. So I'm not going to, put them in, my doghouse as a whole for the whole season, but I at least have my eye on them even further coming up. And Obviously, I think Purdue is a lesser opponent than what we faced on Friday, but I am still going to have my eye on that, on how do we do there, because I do think it was communication errors. I don't think it's a scheme thing completely. I'm not willing to rule out that maybe our scheme isn't great this year. I'm not willing to rule that out. I'm just not willing to go there just yet after one bad performance. But it is something I am at least keeping my eye on there.
Yes,
But,
something's off because, man,
yeah.
for guys just to be standing looking at each other in the end zone, man, I don't know. Friday night was just weird to begin with. Nebraska never seemed to be on point. But let's go over to the offensive side of the ball. And, Matt Rule after the game didn't have a problem with Satterfield's play calling. I will tell you, I think one of his best play calls was the 3rd and 3, because the personnel they had on the field, Illinois had no idea that they were going to throw the ball. Illinois looked at the personnel on the field and said, oh, Nebraska's going to run it, because there were guys on the field that you would not expect Nebraska to throw the football. Yeah. That was a moment. And Dylan missed in the end zone, which I don't think was his first read. There's a crosser that's coming across to Borkature wide open. I think that was his read. And then in the distance, he saw Lindenmeyer open and adjusted and missed on him. And that's on Dylan. That's a miss. That's got to be connected. Yeah. But I love the concept of what they were doing. But I want to go back earlier in the game when it pertains to going for the pass compared to the run. The drive that Nebraska had 1st and goal at the 5. Dowdell runs for 2. Okay, so now you have 2nd and goal at the 3. Bam, bam, back-to-back passes. You have to settle for a 21-yard field goal. What do you think goes through Satterfield's head trying to combine, man, we got Raiola. They're giving us some options in the passing game to let's just simply run the ball, boys.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree. I thought Satterfield called a pretty good game. I don't think it was perfect, but I don't think in Division I football you're going to see a perfect game plan from pretty much anybody. I do think that it is kind of a tough balance because, like I said on here last week, I still think this is a run-first team. But the way that Illinois was shutting down our inside run game, absolutely, completely dominating it up front. I'll be real. I thought of you guys a couple of times during that game, and I was thinking, man, I don't care what I said to Nick and Gary. I want to just put the ball in 15's hands some of these times, right? Just because that was kind of more as the game went on a little bit. But I do think it is kind of a tough balance right now because we have such a talented kid. I think he's the most talented freshman in the entire country right now. I think that's a very tough thing when the run game isn't going perfect. That hey, what? Just put the ball in 15's hands. And I do think that, I don't know, I feel like that's a tough balance because in some instance, we did put the game in 15's hands and we did trust him. And not to, kind of go back to that 3rd and 3, I thought that also was a beautiful play call. I think that was actually the 3rd read was the deep ball because we also had the flat. But it's just a miss. But then when we talk about putting the, trust in the kid, I don't love that we went for the field goal in that instance, if I'm being real with you.
I'm right there with you.
In some instances, we trusted, we put the ball in 15's hands, and hey, I am good with that. I'm good with that pretty much at any portion of the game. Obviously, the one you referenced about, throwing the ball twice, sure, maybe we could have ran the ball there, at least on 2nd down. I'm cool with that, but I'll be real with you guys. If the answer that we end up getting is I trusted 15 to make a play and it didn't happen, I can live with that personally just because of how well he has done, if that kind of makes sense what I'm saying. If that's the option we're going to go with is, hey, we need a play, we're going to put it in 15's hands and see what happens. I personally can live with that until proven otherwise.
The offensive approach, second half compared to first half, points in the first half, second half been limited. What stands out to you going all the way back to Colorado?
I think what happened at Colorado, and I think that was kind of a different situation, but I do still have my eyes on it. I think what happened with Colorado, and even UTEP for that matter, but
Yeah.
All the folks on Colorado was like, hey, we're up 28 points. We're just going to try and run the football. I came on here that Monday and kind of was questioning it, but then I listened to Satterfield and Rule talk about it throughout the week, and my opinion slightly shifted on that of like, okay, I see what I can live with what they were doing. That was obviously not the situation on Saturday, but I do think that those aren't exactly apples to apples comparisons, if that makes sense. I think part of the offensive troubles on Friday night, I think it was just, I mean, we hear Rule talk about it all the time, right? Playing complementary football, offense helping defense, defense helping offense. There was not very much help on defense. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
And I don't think Nebraska had a ton of opportunities in the second half. I went back and looked yesterday, but they didn't have a ton of drives yet in the second half. Now, obviously, leaving points on the board with that field goal was huge. Having a couple punts, obviously not ideal. But if you get your offense out there, they have to punt, and then the defense is out there for 6-7 minutes. That puts a lot of pressure on your offense when they get back out there. So I know this sounds maybe kind of weird to some listeners, but I'd say part of the offensive struggles were a little bit because of the defense, if that makes any sense, if you can wrap your head around it.
Yeah, I think Dylan, and this isn't on Dylan, but I'm using him because he's the leader of that offense. They needed to stay on the field a little bit longer because I thought that defense in the second half was starting to get gassed, and Nebraska just didn't have the ball. That's the defense not able to get off the field and give the ball back to the offense. We'll get Chatter on this because back to Dylan, and if that's his fourth game in college as a true freshman, the future is bright. Kid's a difference maker. NFL throws, easy arm strength. He'll have his freshman moment here or there, but I'll take all of those to get the upside of Raiola. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about his wide receivers with the caveat, Ben, that I think Illinois' defensive backs are really good. There's a couple of guys who are going to play on Sunday, including Xavier Scott. But the fact that they're willing, if I have a guy that is like Raiola as a trigger man, the fact that I am willing to stick to man-to-man with the wide receivers and maybe inch a couple of guys into the box, what does that say to you about how oppositions approach Nebraska's wide receiver talent?
I think that it really just shows that we haven't really established that ability to connect on some real deep shots. I think it shows that throughout the first few games, like we've shown, like, hey, our game plan is to try and run the football, and we're going to beat you over the top once you fully commit to that. Well, we weren't able to do it. And I do think, kind of talking more about like some of the things Satterfield did, like, hey, I'll come in on here and point out, like, I don't think through the first 3 weeks, Satterfield just forgot how to use Thomas Fedoni. I think that was being saved a little bit. And I think that in some instances, we showed some real big bright spots with that. There were some very beautiful play calls on when we run some sort of nub trips look, and we got slants in a corner on the backside. And some of those things looked really good. But at the same time, like, we just weren't able to capitalize enough. And I think part of that is like Illinois' DBs were playing very well, and they were very confident. And I'll come on here and be the first to say I underestimated Illinois defensively more than I probably should. Especially in the passing game. I wrote on the blog on the NBNR podcast that preseason on August 16th, I predicted Illinois to end up winning the game. And that sucked that I was correct on that, but I put they were a good tackling team. They're going to come in and try and shut down the run, all this pressure on Nebraska. I hate that I was correct on that, but I did not give them enough credit in their defensive passing game. That was something that I think I'd like to see some more. I like to see some more production out of our offense against passing games, particularly because, hey, it's the Big Ten. We're going to see some good defenses. Like, this is going to be a consistent theme that we're going to see good defenses. So I do think that, hey, we got to figure out the offense a little bit. I don't think the offense was as big of a red flag, but I do think not, like you said, like last year when teams completely committed to the run, we at least a few times beat them pretty deep. That did not happen on Friday night, like on consistent big deep shots. So that is something to at least keep our eye on. But ultimately, I have faith in 15. Like you said, there's going to be a few freshman moments, but I love this kid. And like I said earlier here in this call of like, hey, if we're going to put the ball in 15's hands, I can live with it.
Oh, absolutely. He's a dude. I mean, at least that's when you're trying to figure everything else out, he's a guy that I think anybody in the country would start with. Ben, as always, appreciate it.